A Catholic bishop from the Midwest made headlines this week with his recent column criticizing the Catholicism of President Biden. Is the president making a mockery of the faith? Bishop Thomas Paprocki of Springfield, Illinois, joins us to explain. And the kicker of the Kansas City Chiefs is under attack over a commencement given at a Catholic college. The Papal Posse, Father Gerald Murray and Robert Royal, are here with analysis. We'll bring you the next installment of our series on the explosion of Christian prayer and meditation apps. Alex Jones, the CEO of Hallow, joins us with answers. Finally, veteran TV writer and producer Karen Hall shares her new book, The Sound of Silence. The World Over begins right now.
Now, Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, send me an X post. I'm at Raymond Arroyo. Lots to cover. Let's get into it. The Catholic Bishop of Springfield, Illinois, is calling out President Joe Biden for making a mockery of the Catholic faith. What did the president do to draw such strong criticism from a U.S. bishop? Here to explain, I'm joined by Bishop Thomas Paprocki. Your Excellency, thank you for being here. Before we get into your recent column, I should mention you are hardly the first American bishop to criticize the president for the practice of his faith. Archbishop of Washington, Cardinal Wilton Gregory, said in a recent interview on CBS this past Easter that Joe Biden is a cafeteria Catholic, particularly on the issue of abortion. Now, in your diocesan magazine on May 12th, you called the president out for making the sign of the cross at an abortion rally last month in Tampa, Florida. What did you think when you saw the president of the United States cross himself that way, and we'll put it up on the screen, while vigorously promoting abortion in Florida?
Well, the word that came to mind for me was mocking the Catholic faith. You know, the sign of the cross is a very sacred gesture. We make that sign of the cross, which reminds us of our Lord dying on the cross for us as he gave his life to free us from our sins. And as we make the sign of the cross, we invoke the Holy Trinity, the God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So it's a very sacred ritual and a very sacred sign. And what I saw about this was that the president was doing this at an abortion rally. And the speaker there was lamenting the fact that this was in Florida, where the Florida legislature and the governor just signed a bill that would reduce the period of legal abortion from 15 weeks to 6 weeks. And as the speaker was saying that, the president made the sign of the cross, which typically is an indication, it's a gesture, and that a person, even without saying any words, is kind of indicating that, oh, God help us, you know, isn't this a terrible thing? Mm-hmm. So in other words, he's saying what's a terrible thing that abortion is legal, that the period of time has been changed from 15 weeks to 6 weeks.
Has President Biden crossed a line, do you think, into heresy by his open and public support of abortion? I mean, in the column, you discuss Canon 751 at length. Explain to those yet to read the piece or watch your video what that canon requires of the faithful.
Yes, so in reference to Cardinal Gregory's phrase, cafeteria Catholic, that's something that we clergy have been using for some time, actually. Refers to Catholics that pick and choose. They choose those things that they like about the Catholic faith, and they either ignore or even reject the things that they don't like about the Catholic faith. And what I pointed out in my column in discussing heresy, apostasy, and schism is that there are limits to what you can pick and choose, because if you reject some things, in effect, you're rejecting the Catholic faith. So heresy, for example, is to reject some truth of the Catholic faith that is divinely revealed or taught by the Church that must be held as one of our basic beliefs. For example, the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments, someone can't say, well, I only believe 9 of them or 8 of them. If you do that, you're rejecting something revealed by God, because God is the one who gave Moses and the people of Israel and us the Ten Commandments. So, for example, President Biden, in effect, is saying because he promotes abortion rights, He's called for the restoration of the law of Roe versus Wade, and he was very pro-abortion in his statements. In effect, he's rejecting the Fifth Commandment, which is thou shalt not murder. So he's in favor of the murdering of the killing of unborn children. And so, that raises the question, well, is he rejecting a divinely held truth that we must hold as a truth? And in that regard, it's interesting. The canon law also provides that for heresy, it's an automatic penalty, that no church authority has to declare it, because a person could be a heretic. In fact, without even making any public statement, it's a matter of belief. You believe in your own mind. So I reject what the Catholic Church teaches. I reject what the Bible says about the Ten Commandments. In effect, you've made yourself a heretic, and that's why it's an automatic penalty, which does not need to be declared. If the person continues to be very public in that kind of a statement, well, then ecclesiastical authority could say something. And in that regard, every Catholic belongs to a parish and belongs to a diocese, and then it pertains to their own bishop to say something about that. And in the case of a head of state, which the president is, a declaration of that sort would actually be reserved to the Pope.
Mm-hmm. You said it's a mockery of faith, that gesture he made, crossing himself with the utterance that abortion has been reduced in the state of Florida. A Spanish bishop referred to it as sacrilegious, a profanation. Your Excellency, the last two Cardinal Archbishops of Washington and others have stopped short of calling for communion to be withheld from the president. Would you deny Joe Biden communion if he were to present himself for the sacrament in your diocese? And is that what his present stance requires?
Yes, I would deny him communion if he were to come to Springfield. I don't necessarily expect him in the immediate future, but you never know during the campaign if he might show up at a mass. And that's a question that really pertains not only to the local bishop, but even to the local pastor, because pastors sometimes need to make this determination with their own parishioners. If they have a parishioner, for example, who's living in a scandalous life, and that person comes up for communion, that person, actually the priest should talk with them beforehand and say, you shouldn't really be coming up to communion. But I can't speak for other bishops, but I'd speak for myself that I would have a very difficult time giving Holy Communion to President Biden.
Bishop Thomas Paprocki, we will leave it there. And you can read the bishop's columns at the Diocese of Springfield's website, dio.org. Just click on the news media page at the top of that website. And you can listen to Bishop Paprocki's podcast at EWTN's Podcast Central. It's the only diocesan podcast featured there at EWTN.com/podcast. Thank you, Bishop.
You're welcome, Raymond. God bless you and your work.
An NFL kicker's commencement speech at a Catholic college is drawing calls for his firing. Here with analysis of that story and many more is the Papal Posse. Editor-in-Chief of theCatholicThing.org, Robert Royal, and canon lawyer and priest of the Archdiocese of New York, Father Gerald Murray. Thank you both for being here. As we mentioned, Kansas City Chiefs kicker Harrison Butker delivered a fiery commencement address at Benedictine College. He devoted a large part of that speech to the bishops, President Biden, the celebration of the traditional family. Take a look.
Our own nation is led by a man who publicly and proudly proclaims his Catholic faith, but at the same time is delusional enough to make the sign of the cross during a pro-abortion rally. Before we even attempt to fix any of the issues plaguing society, we must first get our own house in order, and it starts with our leaders. Our bishops are not politicians, but shepherds. So instead of fitting in the world by going along to get along, they too need to stay in their lane and lead. I'm beyond blessed with the many talents God has given me, but it cannot be overstated that all of my success is made possible because a girl I met in band class back in middle school would convert to the faith, become my wife, and embrace one of the most important titles of all, homemaker.
It didn't take long for Butker to get raked over the coals in the media. Former Monday Night Football reporter Lisa Guerrero called Harrison out for being sexist, citing the large female viewership of the NFL. USA Today Sports labeled the speech ugly, merely for celebrating homemakers for their, by choice, I should add, including his wife, Isabel. The NFL has now even come out with a statement. We'll put it up on the screen. Harrison Butker gave a speech in his personal capacity. His views are not those of the NFL as an organization. The NFL is steadfast in our commitment to inclusion, which only makes our league stronger. That's Jonathan Bean, the NFL Senior VP of Diversity and Inclusion. Now, Father, are you surprised at the backlash we're seeing simply for an NFL player celebrating traditional roles as a choice?
Well, the NFL's made a terrible mistake in going after someone for speaking their religious convictions. A couple of things I can say, Raymond. Number one, is the NFL in the business of commenting on the religious speeches given by its membership? If they're going to talk about the personal conduct of players, they better be very careful, because there is no rule that NFL players have to clear their speeches with the league in order to exclude religious truths that the league doesn't find good. And then secondly, the VP for inclusion, he should be renamed the VP for exclusion, because he's excluding Harrison Butker and millions of Catholics who are in the NFL either as players or viewers. And by the way, I think his wife decided that she liked being a homemaker, just like my mom did.
Right.
So the NFL, we could have a crime sheet 3 pages long in the last 3 years of NFL players who committed violent acts against women. And here we have a man affirming the value of your wife and kids being raised by a religious NFL player. I think the NFL has done something terrible here.
Bob, as I read this, and Bill Donahue has a particularly good piece about it today, this is, as Father referenced, about religious liberty. Butker's expressing his faith in the public square at a Catholic college where he got a standing ovation, by the way. Do you see this as an attempt to silence Catholic thought and practice in the public square?
Well, of course. It's part and parcel of what's happened with social media, that you almost can't become any dumber than people have become about these kinds of issues, as if some one person speaking about one thing implicates an entire organization like the NFL. Now, it's known to social scientists, just to take one point, that most women, when they are surveyed, actually say they would like to spend more time at home with their families and their children, especially when their children are young. So the fact that a few voices out there in social media and on TV and in these DEI organizations have protested is not a surprise. But I think the rest of us ought to really be forcefully putting out there, as Butker himself did, that a lot of fulfillment does not come through work. A lot of fulfillment comes through your family. And that's true not only for women, but for men as well.
Yeah, which he referenced in his talk. He said, look, he basically said, we're called to do things in the world, but our highest vocations are as mother and father to children and building a home. That was, in essence, what he was saying. Father, I had to laugh when I saw the outrage over an NFL player saying things like, we should protect unborn kids and we need to have more moms and dads at home. There's a petition to get the Chiefs to fire Butker over these comments. Wake-up call. 27 NFL players have been arrested multiple times for assault and battery of spouses, drug use, theft, killing animals. But Harris Butker is the moral problem at the NFL? I think not. Father, should the NFL overreact? Might Butker have a First Amendment claim, do you think?
Well, I think he has to inform the NFL that he did not begin the speech with these words. My views represent the NFL policy. He never said that. For the NFL to conclude that when a player speaks in his own capacity, that somehow his views might be thought to represent what the NFL, whatever their values are, that's absurd. Legally speaking, he's been slandered by the NFL because they're imputing that he harmed the organization by doing something he should have known he shouldn't have done. There's no way that's true. He spoke as a Catholic. Are Catholics no longer welcome in the NFL? I mean, this is ridiculous. Where's Newt Rockne in all this picture? Come on, Catholics have been involved in football from the beginning. And I think we need to get back to religious liberty as the cornerstone of how we live with each other.
Bob, you know what irritates me most about this? And it's a sign, I think, of the polarization we find ourselves in. There's an instant ideological mobilization and demonization of whomever says something in defense of these traditional values. But there's no counter. Where are the Catholic bishops saluting this man? Where are the Catholics raising their voices to support him? You know, they're really good at letting people get attacked in public. Your thoughts, Bob?
Yeah, you know, I was really taken. At first, when he made these remarks, I thought that he had gone to a Catholic college, because he sounds like somebody who's been deeply formed in the faith. And I mean, not just in personal practice, but in expressing some of the most important things that the church has to say in public these days. As it turns out, he did not go to a Catholic college or university and learn this stuff all on his own. And it's sad to say, but I think we almost could say that it would be very rare for someone who had been through most Catholic colleges and universities to be so bold in asserting Catholicism. I think they would be a little bit more gun-shy about this sort of thing. But look, it's great that he put it out there. I don't think that these attempts to get him fired are going to work. The Kansas City Chiefs need him. He won the Super Bowl for them this year. He's as important to them as Patrick Mahomes. And I think that is going to prevail over all this sort of ideological DEI stuff that's happening.
Father BUTKER also spent a chunk of his speech focused on the U.S. Catholic bishops and his support of the traditional Latin Mass, which I heard one of my broadcast colleagues today equate with extremism and, some kind of jihad mentality. But this, I think, is going to be the next wave of attack on him from inside the church, or those who've left the church but are vaguely Catholic. But the fact is, this is where vibrant young Catholics live, in these traditional parishes. Speak to me a little bit about that advocacy, if you will, for the traditional Latin Mass and the vociferous backlash against it.
To try and marginalize people like the Latin Mass as extremists and out of the church even, or people who don't understand Christianity or Catholicism, this is false. Pope John Paul II understood very well that the traditional Latin Mass, which had been celebrated in this church for more than 1,000 years, maybe 1,500 years, this is a worthy thing needing to be preserved. Harrison BUTKER serves the traditional Latin Mass. You know, he's someone who understands the beauty and meditative spirit of it. It's no surprise that you go to a Latin Mass, you see large families, you see devout people, you see young men entering the seminary. The critics of the Latin Mass are most ungenerous in imputing these kind of motives and schemes on the part of Latin Mass goers. They should take a break, go to a Latin Mass, talk to some people. You'll see. I know this from experience. They're ordinary Catholics who want to pray in peace. There's no extremism in going to the Latin Mass. That's a false claim.
Yeah, unless carrying children into the world and into Mass is suddenly an extremist thing. I guess empty pews is a better answer. Good luck with that. And speaking of the U.S. bishops, a USCCB-sponsored webcast on unity, moderated by Gloria Purvis and featuring Bishop Robert Barron, Cardinal Robert McElroy of San Diego, and Bishop Daniel Flores of Brownsville, aired this week. The live stream panel discussion warned of polarization in the church, urging a return to civility and dialogue. Here's a little bit of the exchange.
What's happened now is a kind of tribalism, I would say, is a falling into opposing camps. And what's broken down is the love that makes real dialogue possible, where I see it in my work in the internet space. And sadly, not just in the political culture, in the culture of the church, you see it.
It's always good to remember what Jesus would not do when he was out amongst the people. He would not be unkind, especially to the poor and to those who had no standing in the world. And also, he would never commit an injustice in order to kind of promote justice.
People are coming toward each other in the life of the church, looking first at that label. What are you? Where do you stand in the warlike culture politics of our country, rather than what unites us and where do we stand in terms of our identity as Catholics and with a Christological outlook?
Bob, your thoughts on this exchange? Has tribalism infected the church at the parish level in recent years, stunting true dialogue? Or is there a true disagreement over the direction of doctrine and discipline, and that is causing this rupture, if you will, in unity?
Yeah, in my experience, at least, most parishes you get along rather well because you don't necessarily have to get into some of the hot button issues on a regular basis, in an ordinary basis in a parish. But I think you're exactly right, Raymond, that we are at a point in a culture where we have two different countries here in the United States. I mean, no amount of attempts to civilize it, that's the phrase that they used in this discussion this week, to civilize this situation is going to get us past what are irreconcilable differences. People on the one hand who think that abortion and trans rights are sacrosanct. I mean, our president and a former Speaker of the House, both Catholics, have said that it is almost a sin to oppose those things. I mean, to me, I'm grateful for the almost, but it's astonishing that one part of our church could actually think that to try to control those things is somehow sinful. And on the other hand, of course, we have people who are very passionate, heroic and whatnot, and trying to save unborn human life, which is being destroyed almost at 1 million lives a year.
Father, it's curious. That notion really wasn't delved deeply into. They simply said, well, this group is opposing the Pope or this group is opposing that one. But they really didn't explore those finer points. I mean, just as an example, and if I had been the moderator, I would have raised this. Cardinal McElroy was a big supporter of ordaining female deacons before that last synod. Is the break and the rupture being caused by that kind of doctrinal friction and innovation being imposed on the church? Is that the source of what divides us, Father?
Well, absolutely. And that's what's ironic. I read the transcript of this discussion, and they, it seems, intentionally avoided naming any specific doctrinal question or doctrinal teaching which is under basically assault by forces of reform and renovation, so to speak. That women deacons is a perfect example of that. Teaching on homosexuality. Cardinal McElroy is very forceful that he thinks the current church teaching on homosexuality needs to be re-examined. Now, as regards our divine Savior always being kind, that depends on the word kindness. If rebuking a sinner is an act of kindness, which it is, well, then most people would think that he's being mean. Remember what he said about the Pharisees? Your whitened sepulchres, whitewashed tombs. Yeah. He called Herod that fox. I mean, the Lord used vivid language to try and stir people out of sin. The discussion came down, in my theory, and my understanding, to basically Rodney King approach to life. Remember the motorist, Rodney King? And during the riots in L.A., he said, can't we all just get along? That's, in the essence, you draw from this. There was no attempt to say Catholic orthodoxy is not negotiable. We don't dialogue on the content of the faith. What we dialogue on is how do we help people to understand and believe in the doctrine of the faith? That is basically absent from that discussion.
Well, and I also, when some of the participants here, and you see, I mean, look, I get into all kinds of trouble because I speak the truth and I'm blunt on this stuff, but the audience needs to know, they already know. Bishop Flores is one of the main proponents of unregulated immigration in any possible way. When those what are political issues become bigger and more important than the foundational eternal teachings of the church, it throws the balance off. And yeah, people stop listening because they want the truth and the eternal. They don't want the political. We have enough of that. And it's sad that those issues really didn't come up honestly because they are uncomfortable. And that's how you have dialogue. But I want to move on to the fruits of Fiducia Supplicans, the Vatican directive on same-sex blessings and blessings of couples in irregular situations. In April, Father Joseph Williams, the pastor of St. Vincent de Paul Parish near downtown Chicago, blessed a same-sex couple. In video shared on Instagram by Kelly Knight, a Methodist minister and a self-identified queer community organizer, Father Williams is seen in church blessing the same-sex couple. Looks like a marriage ceremony. Since then, Williams has apologized for the way in which he blessed them, calling it a very poor decision that violated the Catholic Church's new guidelines. Father, the priest had initially suggested that fiducia supplicans allowed for this type of blessing to be administered. Your reaction when you saw this?
No, this is horrifying. He also referred to the two people as spouses. This is absurd, but predictable, because fiducia supplicans is basically said people who are living in homosexual relationships are now capable of receiving a blessing, which means God will favor their relationship. No, the bishops of Africa understood the threat that fiducia supplicans represents to the integrity of the faith. And this is a perfect example of it. He apologized not for the fact that he's confirming people in sin, but that he chose the wrong words and symbols in doing so. That was obviously intended to be a pseudo-marriage. It had all the characteristics of people getting married in church. His apology, I think, was a sort of a non-apology. This is where the Catholic Church is going when priests take fiducia supplicans, apply it locally. Fiducia supplicans needs to be withdrawn. The bishops of Africa, Cardinal Mbongo of Kinshasa, is absolutely right. This is a denial of Scripture and Catholic teaching. It needs to end.
Bob, now the Archdiocese of Nairobi, Kenya, allowed a polygamist to marry in a Catholic church on May 5th. The priest celebrated this alleged marriage between a man and a woman, and another woman, his second concubine, in the pews. Bob, the ambiguity of recent Vatican pronouncements seems to be colliding with inculturation to create situations like this. What do you make of this polygamous marriage in Africa, where otherwise there's this great return to tradition?
Well, look, we've talked about this many times on the show. Part of the difficulty is the moment in which we find ourselves toward the end of this, the papacy of Pope Francis, is that his desire to reach out to all people, to include everybody, clashes obviously, openly, with teachings that have been part of Catholic thought for millennia, and particularly on these sexual issues. We knew that this was going to happen with regard to blessing same-sex couples. Once you start talking about blessing irregular unions, that the same thing was going to happen. I have to say, this was really quite shocking, this polygamous marriage that was allowed to take place. But it's inevitable, because the confusion that exists here is this, that in these documents, we get, I don't want to be too dismissive about this, but really a kind of perfunctory statement that only within marriage or sexual relations allowed, going on, that all the traditional teachings are stated, but then the way that people are going to behave, the way that people in parishes in various places around the world is open to kind of discussion. We remember that Cardinal Fernandez had to come out after Fiducia Supplicans and saying, well, these things should be spontaneous and brief, and they should not resemble a marriage in any way. But that's just talk. The documents themselves clearly open up these possibilities, and there are many people out there who want to take advantage of them.
I want to turn to Vatican news now. Pope Francis has officially decreed a Holy Year to be held in 2025, which will kick off this December and continue until January of 2026. 32 million pilgrims are expected. The Bull of Indiction announcing this Holy Year was read by Pope Francis at St. Peter's on May 9th. He said this about God's judgment. Another reality having to do with eternal life is God's judgment, both at the end of our individual lives and the end of history. Artists have often attempted to portray it. Here we can think of Michelangelo's magnum opus in the Sistine Chapel in accordance with the theological vision of our times and with the aim of inspiring a sense of awe in the viewer. Father Jerry, we spoke about this a bit earlier. Just after the bull was released, what do you make of the way the reference to Michelangelo's Last Judgment is worded? It's sort of framed as the theological vision of their times.
Yeah, that was both shocking and upsetting and disappointing, because Michelangelo's depiction of the Last Judgment is directly taken from sacred scripture. That, the sheep and the goats are going to be divided, and the sheep will join God in heaven, the goats will be in hell. To say that that painting was according to a theological vision of a particular time, implying that it's not the theological vision of the time that we live in. That's very disappointing. That's a very ambiguous way to describe it.
Bob, before we run out of time, your thoughts on sort of dismissing Michelangelo's vision and theology, while at the same time the Vatican, the contemporary Vatican, can't seem to quit the very confused and I would say ugly art of disgraced Jesuit Marco Rupnik. That art is still on the front of their website. It's on announcements. It's remarkable, the endurance of Marco Rupnik, a guy who is charged and more than charged at this point with abusing multiple nuns, men, women. It's just outrageous.
In the case of Rupnik, we're really in the midst of a very raw feeling about this because these women have come forward and told of absolutely horrible, terrible sacrileges that were practiced, not just sexual engagement, but outright sacrilege. And yet his art continues to be the church in Aparecida in Brazil that was just consecrated has some mosaics by Rupnik. So here we have on the one hand women coming forward and talking about being abused and the church wanting to hear them and to value that, and yet on the other hand we allow this to go on. And by the way, in addition to his artwork, Rupnik is still a priest. And what is that all about?
Before we run out of time, the other big news of the week is the impending release of a new Vatican document from Cardinal Fernandez and the DDF, Doctrinal Office of the Vatican, on discerning Marian apparitions and other supernatural events. We've been hearing about this for several weeks, and the pronouncement is expected on Friday, May 17th. Now, the last time the Vatican's Doctrinal Office spoke on this issue was in 1978 under Paul VI. At that time, the Vatican outlined a process by which the Church investigates alleged apparitions and revelations. Father, what are your thoughts on this document? Are you hearing anything? There don't seem to be many leaks at this point.
No, I haven't heard much, but I'm very curious because one of the problems in the modern age is the wide and rapid diffusion when a so-called seer or someone claims to have an apparition or a vision, that the message gets instantly, because of the internet, it's all over the world. And it can attract a following in many, many places. So according to the current law, it's up to the local bishop to investigate the apparition. And then he can get assistance from the bishops' conference because many local bishops are just overwhelmed, even bishop conferences. So my curiosity is whether the Vatican is going to take direct responsibility for judging these apparitions. And sad to say, and this is something we see, sex abuse as an example of it, religious frauds are multiple, and it can be very profitable for them. And this is something that has to be dealt with. I'd be interested in the criteria for veracity that they use. And we have to recognize that, yes, the Virgin Mary has been sent by God. Our Lady of Fatima and Our Lady of Lourdes, those are two of the most important events in the history of the church in the 19th and 20th centuries.
Bob, what might that document say? What do you imagine the concerns are at this point? Might there be an assessment of Medjugorje? I mean, I know the Pope has sort of been cold to that particular apparition and reticent about a lot of these apparitions as they appear. He's made the comment that, Our Lady is not a postal worker and, dropping messages through time. The Virgin Mary is not a post mistress who sends messages every day. That was the quote.
Yeah, look, as I understand it, the Church never says that Catholics have to believe in an apparition. The most that the Church can say is that there is nothing against the faith in a particular apparition of the Virgin Mary or another saint or something else. I suppose my worry here, as I think has been verified over the last 11 years, is that Rome is going to change the balance of decision-making, as Father was hinting at, between the local ordinary and Rome. We may see Rome arrogating into itself more powers to say what is and is not acceptable in terms of these these apparitions. I don't know that that's going to be that serious a thing. They don't happen all that often. There are obviously stunning apparitions like Lourdes and Fatima. And I mean, Fatima is one of these things that was confirmed by tens of thousands of people who saw the sun dance, et cetera. I don't even know how you could deny the miracle at Fatima. But certainly because of what we've seen in other documents, we're going to want to pay attention to that. Ironically, in a papacy that wants to decentralize and go out to the peripheries, an awful lot of powers are being brought into Rome, and I think we may see that.
Gentlemen, we will leave it there. Until next time, we'll be looking forward to your commentary by both Robert Royal and Father Gerald Murray over at thecatholicthing.org. Thank you both. My next guest grew up Catholic, but little by little, he drifted away and then found his way back to the faith in quite an inspiring and entrepreneurial way. He's now CEO of the #1 Catholic prayer app on the social media landscape today. Why and how are prayer and meditation apps helping people to rediscover their faith? Here with answers is a guy who certainly knows, the CEO and founder of Hallow, not to mention a domer, Alex Jones. Alex, thanks for being here. Before we get into the nuts and bolts of Hallow, and the reason I mentioned the domer thing will present itself in time, I want to talk about your history. Like so many, you grew up Catholic, but after high school, you drifted. What inspired your search for the way back? I mean, you were essentially an atheist at one point.
Yeah, had you asked me, I would have considered myself an agnostic or atheist for most of high school and college, unfortunately. I was always fascinated with this idea of spirituality and meditation. And unfortunately, my mind did not first go to St. Teresa of Avila, St. John of the Cross, but to kind of secular meditation and secular spirituality. And something strange kept happening every time I would try to meditate or every time I would try to sit still, as my mind kept feeling pulled towards an image of the cross or the name Jesus or something Christian, which, I was agnostic, so I thought that was incredibly strange. I thought I had this really interesting discovery, and so I went to priests and nuns that I knew and said, hey, is there any way there's some sort of intersection here between this meditation thing and this faith thing? And they all laughed at me and said, yeah, we've been doing it for 2,000 years. You probably should have heard about it. It's called prayer. And, to me, I had obviously heard of prayer. But to me, prayer was just the stuff that I memorized as a kid, or just asking God for stuff or telling him what I was grateful for. And that had always just felt, they're beautiful ways to pray, but to me had always just felt like I was talking to myself or journaling in my own head. And I started discovering this whole world of contemplative and meditative prayer within the church, Lectio Divina, Ignatian spirituality, the dozens and dozens of different techniques. But I sat down one day, randomly opened up a Bible, did Lectio Divina, and it just changed my life, brought me back to my faith, and was the beginning of Hallow. We built Hallow really just for me, but for me, it's just this beautiful relationship and opportunity to listen and to surrender to Christ. So changed my life.
And look, you've talked about developing an interest in meditation around that time you were graduating from Notre Dame in mechanical engineering. What was it about meditation that interested you? Look, we were all, I was in the theater. I remember there were a lot of people doing transcendental meditation and Eastern meditation. And there was something appealing in that you're tapping into what we can't see. You're tapping into something larger than yourself. What was it about meditation that was pulling you in?
Yeah, I think, it was much broader than that. It was really spirituality and the contemplative life at a high level. But for me, I think it's really two things. I think one is this deep hunger for peace. I think especially in today's world, especially in young people, especially with people who are living lives on their phones, there's just this hunger for real peace. And what does it mean to not just watch a Netflix show or not just distract yourself with social media, but find real peace? And so that was a piece of it. And I think there's also this big desire to be a part of something bigger than yourself, which you see in a bunch of different places. But I think especially in secular spirituality, you see this fascination with, going beyond yourself and finding purpose in that. And, there's no better source of peace than God, and there's no better source of, meaning and purpose than Christ and the mission that he gives you. And so for me, finding those within the Christian tradition was just, it was really surprising, which is sad. Yeah. But, it was the perfect fulfillment of it.
Alex, why do you think this rich legacy, and it is a rich legacy of, and it's imaginative, it's profound spirituality, and why do you think that's been suppressed for so long? And what did you learn from the priests and the nuns you talked to at Notre Dame in that senior year? What did they lead you to?
Yeah, I mean, there's such a, like you said, there's such a rich, beautiful tradition of mysticism, of contemplative tradition, of meditative prayer within the church. I mean, Lectio Divina, Ignatian spirituality, Carmelite spirituality, imaginative prayer, sitting in silence, recollection, chant, the rosary, of course. But, there's dozens and dozens of different ways when you say, okay, well, what does it mean to sit still in silence for 10 minutes and listen to God? There's dozens of different ways to try to do that within your own life. And, that's really why we built the app, is to try to help people discover and build daily habits of all these different techniques, primarily just for me. But I think the church, over the last maybe 20, 30 years, I think has started to focus on a lot of the pieces that we've maybe missed or have fallen away from. I think there's this emphasis on truth and, the real rigorous theology and philosophy that goes into our faith, which I think, folks like Bishop Barron and Father Mike do an incredible job of reintroducing people to. I think there's beauty, which again, a lot of folks have reintroduced people to. But I think there's this missing piece, which we get really excited about, which is peace and this beautiful spirituality. And I think you're right. It's fallen away. Maybe not in the world. There's still, thousands and thousands of Christian monks. But, from a secular perspective, when people think of meditation, they don't think of a Christian monk or St. Teresa of Avila, which is heartbreaking because they should. And so that's one of the things we get really excited about, is how can we help the church refocus on introducing people to the beauty of its spirituality.
And Hallow really offers guided meditations and prayer. What makes it different from other prayer apps? I mean, aside from praying the rosary with Mark Wahlberg or Jonathan Rumi, which are wonderful things, why do you think people are drawn to this app in particular?
Yeah, for us, there's a bunch of things I think we try to do to build a really great app. And for us, it's really just trying to help people build habits of prayer. And we're big fans of anybody trying to help people grow deeper in their faith life. And so we're excited to see more and more folks working on this over the last couple of years. But for us, it really does come down to just really phenomenal content. And that's what most people come to the app for. And so our goal is to try to find the best retreat leaders, the best theologians, the best contemplative leaders, the best imaginative prayer leaders, and bring them to people in their living room. So people like Father Gallagher, who teaches all the priests in the U.S. on Ignatian spirituality, Sister Miriam, who has such an incredible gift at leading people in imaginative prayer, Father Mike, Bishop Barron, Jonathan Rumi, who brings the voice of Jesus to life in a way that's just really phenomenal. Mark Wahlberg, if you want to do like a really fast rosary, is phenomenal. But also if you want to, push yourself in fasting and discipline, I think is great. So for us, it is really getting to partner with the best people, I think, in the world, and to create some of the best content, I think, in the world.
Now, most of the world saw that Hallow app that ran on the Super Bowl earlier this year. That 30-second spot gave Hallow its biggest spike in downloads in the company's history. What did you think after it aired? And are you still seeing the effects of that massive shot of publicity?
Yeah, I mean, over the last, we launched maybe 5 years ago. And over the last few months, we went from, before the Super Bowl, I think we were at 14 million downloads, and we're at almost 20 now. And so it took us 5 years to get to 14, and, only a couple months to jump up from 14 to almost 20. So yeah, it's really been incredible. For us, the really cool part has been seeing people who had fallen away from their faith for years, decades even, or people who were in really tough times, people who were struggling with alcoholism, people who hadn't thought about praying in maybe ever, finding their way back to God, finding some hope and peace in their life, people struggling with grief, being able to find a light again in the darkest moment of their life. And so for us, being able to see what God does in people's lives through the app, being able to reach out to people, especially those who have fallen away, has been a real blessing. And we saw a lot of that with the commercial.
What's next for you and Hallow? How do you plan to further develop and grow the app and, I guess, satisfy the expectation of this huge audience you're serving?
Yeah, for us, I mean, the whole Hallow journey has really just been a journey of surrender. So has just been us learning to go with whatever God wants us to do. And he doesn't usually give us a whole lot of heads up. He gives us maybe a couple weeks at a time. So it's tough for me to guess what he's going to do in the next couple of years. I mean, it's been really cool for us to see internationally. We were #1 in Brazil for Lent, and many Latin American countries, the Philippines. We have 7, 8 different languages now, a good chunk in Europe. But the big focus, I mean, I take my faith super seriously now and have for, since my reconversion. But and it's an honor to get to pray with folks like me who pray every day and take their faith super seriously. We have bishops and monks and priests on the app. But the real soft spot in our hearts and in our mission is reaching out to the people who have really fallen away. And so that's what we really focus on, is how can we reach out to the people who are really the most lost and introduce them to the love and the peace of Christ and welcome them into a relationship with God. And so that's always what we've been focused on and what we'll continue to focus on.
Yeah, those people are the ones who really need it most. I mean, they're searching, they're hurting. I mean, the part of the rationale, I think the impetus for Mother Angelica to found this network was to reach people in their pain, in their suffering, with this message of truth and hope, to throw them a lifeline. And you're doing that as well. Just very quickly, Alex, because you've shared some of this with me. Tell me about the early days of Hallow, how this started. I mean, this was two guys living in an apartment together trying to, code this thing and cobble this together. Tell me about that walk of faith, and was this always an assured thing that this was going to work?
No. I mean, the chances that this thing worked were maybe, 1%. And that's what we assumed going into it. I mean, for me, it was just what I thought God was asking me to do. And at that time, I had just come into a new relationship with him. And so I couldn't really disobey him. And so I had to do it, even though it was crazy. I mean, we drained our 401k account, took whatever that 40% penalty is to try to, have a developer help us. And we coded a bit of it. And my wife was incredible, supported me while she was teaching before we had any kids. But yeah, it was just me and a couple folks trying to code this thing and trying to build something that we loved. And then, for us, it was really just a fun project. Honestly, for me, it was just, hey, maybe this can help me build this habit of prayer, and that, might help me get into heaven. So that seems worth a couple months. But, a handful of friends and family started using it. And one of them actually was my aunt, so I'll shorten the story. But her son, my cousin, had just passed away, and randomly in his sleep, it was heartbreaking. He was 40, in his mid 40s. He had just gotten married. His wife had just gotten pregnant, and he died in his sleep. It was her only son, my godmother, and she was heartbroken and hadn't been we have this big, massive family. We're all focused on she hadn't been eating, she hadn't been getting out of bed, and we were all focused on how do we help, in some small way, how could I possibly help her get through what is just a heartbreakingly difficult moment. And she started, I didn't know she was using the app, but she found it somehow. And she must have been one of the first 10 people to start using it. And she sent us this note that just said, hey, it was Christmas time, and she said, it was Advent. And she said, I just wanted to let you know, Advent is always a pretty stressful time. I have to figure out how I'm traveling, how I'm getting all these gifts for all my grandkids, all this stuff. And I just didn't think I'd be able to do it this year without my only son. And I just faced it with this immense sense of dread and this pain and this darkness. And I just wanted to let you know that I was able to find some sense of hope, some sense of light, because of these meditations on this app, which were really just sitting in silence. And so it was just God bringing her this incredible love and this support in her darkest moment. And I broke down in tears. I fell apart on my floor, and I was like, man, we better keep working on this, because if there is one more person out there, if we work for the next 50 years of our life, we drain all whatever money we have, everybody hates us, our reputations are ruined, whatever it is. But we get one more note like that, we get to see God do that in one more person's life, it will have been worth it. And we just get these notes like this every week now. And so it's just this incredible blessing for us to get to continue to work on.
Alex Jones, we'll leave it there. I love that, the final message there. If you let God work and get out of the way, he always does. But that walk of faith isn't always easy. But boy, the fruits are voluminous and incredible. So thank you for what you do. You can get Hallow at the Apple App Store or Google Play, wherever you download your apps, or visit hallow.com. Thank you, Alex.
Thanks for having me, Raymond.
She is an American television writer, best known for her work on classic series such as MASH, Hill Street Blues, Moonlighting, Judging Amy, and The Good Wife. She has been nominated for 7 Emmy Awards and 6 Writer Guild of America Awards, and many others. She's also the author of a new book, out on May 21st, The Sound of Silence, The Life and Canceling of a Heroic Jesuit Priest. Please welcome Karen Hall to the program. Karen, great to see you. Before we discuss your new book, I'd like to ask you about your other works. I mean, you're best known for your work on MASH and Hill Street Blues and some of the shows I mentioned. How has your Catholic faith influenced those works, and were you always Catholic?
No, I was not. I converted. I fell in love with the church in high school, but I didn't join until 1994.
Wow.
And my first, I had about 35 years in show business, and my first 20, I was a, liberal, bleeding heart, the whole program. They were very happy with me. And then after I converted, they became less happy with me. Although when I first converted, it was during a period of time when spirituality was cool, and they considered Christianity part of that. So that was when Touched by an Angel and I can't remember, there were some other shows like that. And so when I started on Judging Amy, which my sister was running, I didn't want to do it, and she got me to do it by saying, "I'll let you do the God episode." And so I did. I was very happy with the God episode, and then I ended up staying for 5 years. But there were a few jobs that I got because of it. But then I reached a point where kind of the world changed, and I would start to lose jobs because of it. And that's pretty much been the last decade.
Wow. You wrote for network television really during its golden age.
I did.
In the 70s, 80s, 90s. What are your impressions of the TV industry now in the age of Netflix and Amazon? Do you think it's as good as it was back then?
There are some shows that are just as good as it gets. They aren't necessarily PG rated shows, but Succession was really good. The Sopranos, I thought, was one of the best shows in the history of television. And the man who created it was one of my mentors. So,
really?
But these days, the reason I stopped doing staff work is because the last 3 meetings I went to, I pitched my ideas and I got the same note at all 3, and it was, it's not salacious enough. And so I said, there's just no place for me in television anymore. I'm writing my own projects and trying to sell them, and that's what I'll be doing from now on.
The book, The Sound of Silence, which you're about to release, is really the memoir of a friendship, specifically the story of your friendship with Father Paul Mankowski, a Jesuit in the Chicago province who passed away in September of 2020. Tell us who Father Paul Mankowski was and how he touched your life, Karen.
All right. And first, I'll tell you the Flannery O'Connor quote that if I could say it in 25 words, I wouldn't have written a book. But he's very, very hard to describe because he was really so many things, and many of them didn't go together. So he was brilliant. If you ever asked anybody about him, if they knew him, the word that was going to come out of their mouth was brilliant, because, we throw that word around a lot, but he really was. He was exceedingly faithful. He was, a Jesuit's Jesuit back when that meant a thing. And he spoke about 13 languages, half of which were dead. So, I can talk about a scholar, the scholar he was for a long time, but the thing that made everybody surprised by him is that he could talk to you about ancient Semitic languages in one breath and then talk to you about bass fishing in the next. We talked about bass fishing and NASCAR and football and all sorts of things you wouldn't think a scholar would know anything about. He was just, he never talked down to people who weren't as smart as he was. He was always meeting people.
You all became close friends and had regular correspondence. That is what the marrow of this book is. It really is the unseen communications and thoughts of Father Paul Mankowski after he fell out of favor with the Jesuits and was silenced. Tell us what happened, and why did you feel you needed to offer this to the public now?
Okay, the short version of what led to it was that he was telling too much of the truth. And he got into trouble with the Jesuits when he tried to write an article about Pedro Arrupe, their father general, that would forgive him for letting Robert Drinan, the Jesuit congressman, run for Congress, because, as you probably remember, he ran as a Democrat and he was very much in favor of abortion. And so Paul was trying to prove that this was an American construction and that Padre Arrupe did not have any guilt in it. But when he started to research it, he found out that that was not true. It was very much a don't do that, wink, wink. And so he decided, he had researched to write an article about this, and he decided he couldn't write it because what he thought was true was not true. He gave it to James Hitchcock, who's a church historian, just so he'd have the research. And then years later, Robert Drinan started talking about, he spoke out in favor of the partial birth, the ban on partial birth abortion. He was siding with Bill Clinton about, not banning partial birth abortion. And so since he was in the news again, James Hitchcock decided that it was time to tell that story. So he wrote the story, and he told Paul that he'd leave him out of it. And Paul said he didn't want that to be the case. So he wrote that a Harvard graduate student, Paul Minkowski, had given him this research. And the Jesuits went nuts because, they were very proud of their Jesuit congressman. They didn't want him to lose being a representative. And they accused Paul of stealing his research. And to this day, they'll tell you that he stole the research, and it's not true. He asked the archivist if he could have the research, and the archivist said, sure, because, why not? And it wasn't until they realized that he was going to use it to say something unfavorable against their very liberal Father General that it became a problem. And they silenced him not long after that. For about a decade before that, he had been writing articles that I'm sure they were not thrilled with. But that was what they used to officially silence him.
So Paul Minkowski is silenced by the order. Yet you were communicating with him via email over many years. Why do you feel you have to release this now? Why was it important for you to not only capture who Father Minkowski was, but to share his thoughts that were really shared with you in his own silence?
Well, while we were writing to each other for years and years, I would just realize that I had in his emails just gems of little essays on many topics that people would be interested in that they weren't hearing from him because he was not allowed to write. And so I thought I would like to be able to get those to more people. I also wanted to have people know who he is. A lot of people, when I would talk about him, had never heard of him, and that's because the Jesuits made sure no one heard of him. A lot of what he was writing is stuff that would really be perfect for the time and place we find ourselves in right now, because he was very faithful. People called him rigid. He was rigidly attached to the timeless magisterium of Holy Mother Church. And he didn't have a lot of wiggle room there. But the other reason that I wanted to let people read what he had written in my emails was just that you get to see what wonderful person he was, and how funny and how bright and how faithful. And I thought that it would be good for people to know that a priest like this lived, because he really was, he's the closest I'll ever see to holy on this earth. And when he died, I had to get in a line of people who were putting their rosaries on his chasuble in the coffin. So I'm not the only one who thought he was a saint.
And his, as I remember we spoke about this at one point, his computer disappeared after he passed away. So
Yes.
you really are the only person who had record of all these communications.
Yes. And I remember my spiritual director, who had been a Jesuit, said at one time, he said, the most sought after object in Jesuitdom is Paul Minkowski's hard drive. And I said to him, well, that's all on my hard drive now. And I was thinking about that later. Before Paul died, I thought, if Paul dies before me, I'm going to unsilence him, because I don't have a vow of obedience to the Jesuits. And he's somebody that it would do people so much good right now in this time of thorough confusion to hear his voice.
Well, and hear it they shall. The Sound of Silence, the life and canceling of a heroic Jesuit priest by Karen Hall is available at bookstores everywhere and online. Karen, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
That is all the time we have for now. Be sure to catch us next week. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thank you for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo. Bye now.